Good morning. I'm the Reverend Maggie Lovins. I use pronouns of she and her, and I am truly blessed to be y'all's community minister. Please take a moment to set your phones into sacred silence mode or any other electronic devices you may have with you. And I want to wish a warm welcome to everyone here today. We are super glad to have you. And as we move into our worship time together, I would like to offer you opening and chalice words written by Lisa Friedman. It is one of the wonderful readings that are in our magenta or burgundy hymnal. It's not really a hymnal, I guess, because it's all readings. So this is our third UUA hymnal, i.e. book. And we join together as this nice deep breath in and out. Spirit of life and love, we live in a fragmented world that tempts us to despair. We would put it back together piece by piece if it were ours to choose. But sometimes the fragments are enough. In a world of cruelty, there is still power in every act of kindness. In a time of doubt, there is still power in every act of hope. In age of division, there is still power in every act of unity. May we remember by lighting this chalice that sometimes the fragments of meaning we make are just the right size to hold in our hands. May it be so. Please join with me. Rise if you are able to recite our church covenant. Also on the screen behind me. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Thank you very much. And if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to call the choir up real quick. We are going to sing our opening song, number 165, When Windows That Are Black and Cold. Our time for all ages. Bradley?
Good morning, my name is Bradley Vinson. My pronouns are she and her. and I'm going to be sharing a story with you about Sadako's paper cranes. This is called Sadako's Paper Cranes and Lessons of Peace. It was developed by Naomi Funahashi. Did I read this part?
Yeah.
Okay.
On the previous slide.
For the Tribute World Trade Center Visitor Center and illustrated by Rich Lee. Following the 9/11 attacks, an origami crane that was folded by Sadako Sasaki was sent to the Tribute Center as a symbol of peace. This is the story of Sadako's crane. In an effort to end World War II, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan on August 6, 1945. A young girl in Hiroshima, Japan, named Sadako Sasaki was 2 years old when the atomic bomb was dropped. She survived the initial blast and grew up as a happy child who loved to run and play with her friends in elementary school. When Sadako was 11 years old, she started to feel weak and tired all of the time. In February of 1955, she was admitted to the Atomic Bomb Survivors Hospital in Hiroshima. Sadako had developed leukemia from her exposure to radiation from the atomic bomb. Students from a girls' school in Nagoya, Japan, sent origami cranes to the hospital to help the patients feel better. Some of these cranes were given to Sadako. Sadako's father sat beside her bed and said, "When you fold 1,000 paper cranes, your wish will come true." Sadako began folding 1,000 paper cranes using the wrapping paper from gifts she received from friends. She would put the paper underneath her mattress to flatten out the wrinkles. When she ran out of paper, she also used the wrappers from medicine bottles. Some of the special red cranes she folded were made from the wrappers of a new medicine that was donated from the United States. Even though Sadako folded more than 1,000 paper cranes, she could not overcome her disease. She died of leukemia on October 25, 1955. A funeral was held a few days later, but the family was poor and did not have enough money for a tomb. After the funeral, many of Sadako's friends decided to help raise money for a memorial in Sadako's memory. For 2.5 years, Sadako's classmates worked hard on a fundraising campaign to raise money and support to build a memorial in honor of Sadako and all of the children who died from the atomic bombings. On May 5, 1958, the Children's Peace Monument was unveiled in the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. The statue of the young girl holding up the crane is now viewed around the world as a global symbol of peace. Since 1958, many people from around the world, including thousands of students, have visited the Children's Peace Monument. Visitors have witnessed the annual release of doves to commemorate the anniversary of the atomic bombing. Many others have folded and sent strings of origami cranes to Hiroshima as symbols of peace. The origami crane is a symbol of the Sasaki family's hopes for compassion and peace, and importantly, a lasting symbol of Sadako's life. Sadako folded origami cranes to keep her spirit and hopes alive. Today, Sadako's cranes have inspired a small ripple of hope for peace that has grown and spread around the world. Children all around the world fold origami cranes and wish for global peace. Do you know how to fold an origami crane? There are instructions on the table. Where would you send your cranes as a wish for peace? We will now sing the children out and invite them to take some origami paper with them to continue working on these cranes, although I'll point out that Honor has some as well.
Everywhere,
Lovely. Now is the time in our service where we gratefully receive. Time for our offertory. Joe Vinson is current president here at UUCP of the board of directors and the vice president of the Japan American Society of Northwest Florida. He studied Japanese at Florida State University and spent a year abroad at Hiroshima University. Thank you, Joe.
Give me just one moment. All right. Hi, I'm Joe Vinson, he, him pronouns. This is a service about atomic devastation. So, you know, one of those lighthearted services I've maybe started to become known for. Content warning ahead for some difficult material and disturbing illustrations. This week, on August 6th and August 9th, are the 79th anniversaries of the atomic bombs being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the conclusion of World War II. Between 150,000 and 246,000 people were killed, not solely from the initial blast and its fiery aftermath, but also from the effects of radiation poisoning and related illnesses. As Reverend Maggie mentioned, I studied abroad at Hiroshima University from 2002 to 2003, and the city is very dear to my heart. This is a photo from the 58th anniversary commemoration in 2003, which Bradley and I attended, in which the mayor of Hiroshima strongly condemned what was then the recent invasion of Iraq by the United States, a very strong anti-war contingent in Hiroshima, as you can imagine. Here are some photos of me and Bradley from then. Mere wee babes. Here's a photo of the doves being released that was mentioned in the Time for All Ages. Here's a photo from that evening when people are invited to release paper lanterns into the river, the Motoyasu River surrounding the A-bomb dome, which is the ruins of a 1915 building, the Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, that was almost directly beneath the bomb when it detonated in the air. Because the force of the blast hit it vertically, part of its structure survived, though everyone inside was killed. The 79th anniversary is admittedly not a very round number. I thought about waiting until next year to present this, but actually we're hoping to travel to Japan next summer to be in Hiroshima in time for the 80th anniversary. This year, however, is the 30th anniversary of something else, and that is the Enola Gay exhibit fiasco. See, in the lead up to the 50th anniversary of the atomic bombings in 1995, the Smithsonian Institute planned a major exhibit at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., tentatively called The Crossroads, the End of World War II, the Atomic Bomb, and the Origins of the Cold War, It would include not only a restoration of the Enola Gay, the B-29 superfortress that dropped Little Boy, the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, but also an incredibly ambitious multi-part and multimedia exhibition that included lots of historical interpretation. The first draft of the exhibition script, about 500 pages long, began to be circulated in 1994, early 1994, and it was not well received. You could say people lost their dang minds.
The decision to drop the bomb is at the center of this bitter and emotional debate as the Air and Space Museum prepares to display for the first time the Enola Gay. It's a struggle between those who study history and those who experienced it.
I can't believe that they would create such an abomination. You know, it's certainly un-American. And it's derogatory of the American culture. And I would add, if I got on my high horse, that it might be close to treason.
I knew that this exhibition was going to be one that would be very emotional for many people who participated, who've thought about it a long time. Some of them have lived with it for 50 years.
We want to present as best we can multiple views of that history, not a singular view of one or another or a third party.
Veterans groups and newspaper editorials charged America's most popular museum with political correctness in portraying the Japanese as victims. They demanded more attention to Allied casualties and Japanese brutality.
All World War II veterans in the Enola Gay have been prostituted to make a political statement about the horrors of atomic warfare.
Veterans Herman Harrington and Hugh Dagley have already sat through marathon meetings with museum officials, checking the script line by line, word by word. But for them, the controversy's not over until the Smithsonian addresses their core concern, that Truman's only reason for dropping the bomb was to save American lives.
The dropping of the atom bomb saved my life because I was in a replacement depot being sent to Japan in readiness for an invasion.
Is the bottom line for you that the exhibit must say that the atomic bomb ended the war early and saved lives?
Yes.
That's the bottom line, yes. Because that's what happened.
And if it doesn't?
It's not accurate. And we won't like it.
I wonder, Mr. Heyman, to the extent, to what extent you think this might be a philosophical difference in this way, that what the Legion wants here is a memorial, a commemoration, and what the Smithsonian wanted was something else, was a history, and that sometimes those things are in conflict, and perhaps this is one of those times.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that one of the difficulties here was to choose a subject which arouses as much identification and passions as this subject does. And it's difficult to handle this in a way where people with different perspectives on what occurred will feel comfortable.
The Smithsonian's charge in its federal statute is to memorialize the deeds of the military in the showing of the exhibits and so forth. But at the same time, to try to discuss the pros and cons of whether the bomb should have been dropped or shouldn't have been dropped probably belongs someplace else, in a seminar or in some educational event.
Mr. Heyman, is there a point at which you have to say enough is enough, and have you reached that point in dealing with whether it's the Legion or any other group that may have a bone to pick with you over this exhibition?
No, as far as I'm concerned, we'll continue to consult right up to the time the exhibition opens. There was, in fact, a fundamental flaw in the concept of the exhibition. In retrospect, I now feel strongly that despite our sincere efforts to address everyone's concerns, we were bound to fail.
So as that last clip shows, in January 1995, the Smithsonian announced they would scrap the plans for a comprehensive retrospective. The fuselage of the Enola Gay was still displayed for the 50th anniversary, but there was minimal historical context, focusing mainly on the development of the B-29 fleet and the restoration process. This was seen as a momentous failure of public history at a time when many museums were starting to take a more modern view of historical interpretation. C.S. Lewis once described the past as a torrential waterfall, quote, a roaring cataract of billions upon billions of moments, any one of them too complex to grasp in its entirety, and the aggregate beyond all imagination. Even if it were possible to document everything objectively, the sheer volume of information requires that we selectively and subjectively organize it into narratives. That's what historical interpretation is all about. Before the Smithsonian hired Martin Harwitt as NASM director in 1987, its directors came primarily from military or aviation roles. Exhibits were often little more than artifacts with small descriptive labels. Harwitt wanted the museum to be a, quote, public conscience and discuss topics, quote, under public debate. He resigned in the aftermath of the Enola Gay fiasco, saying, quote, I believe that nothing less than my stepping down from the directorship will satisfy the museum's critics and allow the museum to move forward. The American Legion was happy with the results, saying that, quote, the Smithsonian is a federal agency supported by taxpayer money, and rightly or wrongly, what it portrays is seen as the United States version of history. So keep that phrase in mind, the United States version of history. World War II has sometimes been called the Good War, which on its face seems almost like a bad joke. The war claimed at least 70 million lives between 1939 and 1945. Up to 50 million of those were civilians. How on earth could anything like that be good? It has to do with the righteousness of our cause. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, were undoubtedly the bad guys. They were not only the aggressors invading their neighbors to seize land and resources, they were fascist authoritarians. The Nazis under Hitler committed the Holocaust, the mass murder of Jews, Romani, people with disabilities, gay and gender nonconforming people, and anyone else deemed lebensunwertes Leben, life unworthy of life. Mussolini's Italy committed atrocities in Ethiopia and other occupied lands, used mustard gas on civilians and the Red Cross, and brutally crushed domestic dissent. Imperial Japan's occupation of its Asian neighbors resulted in millions of deaths and used systematic rape as a tool of oppression, including the system of comfort women. Their treatment of prisoners was merciless. The problem with this idea of the good war narrative is that it requires superlative conditions. The bad guys do bad things, the good guys do good things. It's inconvenient when good guys do bad things. It causes cognitive dissonance. We don't like to think about, for example, how England's colonial system stole rice and other food from India to feed Allied troops, causing inflation and privation that killed millions in the Bengal famine. History is complicated. Even in the rare situation where you have clearly defined good guys and bad guys, there are a lot of gray decisions. And the dropping of 2 atomic bombs was a gray decision. Obviously, the primary reason was to force a Japanese surrender and end the war quickly, but there were secondary reasons that seemed less noble. For example, we had spent all this time and money on development of this bomb, racing to beat the Germans who were developing their own, and they suddenly surrendered. What, were we just not going to use it? We wanted to demonstrate to the world that America had this terrible weapon to help us jockey for a better position in the post-war order, in which the Soviet Union was likely to go from ally to rival. Indeed, one of the psychological goals identified by the Los Alamos Target Committee was, quote, making the initial use sufficiently spectacular for the importance of the weapon to be internationally recognized when publicity on it is released. That's part of why Hiroshima was selected as the target, not only because it had military facilities, which it did, but because it had been largely spared by previous bombings. It would be hard to say how much damage the bomb was capable of if most of the city had already been destroyed. Understandably, we don't like to think about these reasons. They're inconvenient for the image we like to have of ourselves as Americans, our collective memory, our national identity. And the Enola Gay fiasco showed that for many people, anything that complicates the United States version of history must be opposed. You heard the guy. It might be close to treason. Now, I'm really not interested in Monday morning armchair quarterbacking the Second World War. The difficult decisions made during wartime with so many lives at stake are unfathomable to me. And by all accounts, what happened in post-war Japan was a miracle, turning a shattered, militaristic society into a paragon of peaceful, liberal democracy and an economic powerhouse. And of course, we can't change the past. So what's the point of navel-gazing about it? Why do we not just celebrate the victory? Because there's a danger when we uncritically believe that everything our nation does is good and moral. Call it nationalism, jingoism, American exceptionalism, or whatever else. Americans are justifiably proud of having helped defeat the Axis powers during World War II, but in the decades since, that pride has been cynically hijacked to fuel countless military campaigns and foreign escapades. And in particular, there is a danger in seeing our use of atomic weapons as an unequivocally moral decision, as some do, because it suggests that such a thing could or should happen again. Here are some recent clips where US politicians have used Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the context of Israel's military response in Gaza as positive examples of doing, quote, whatever you have to do to win a conflict, or to, quote, get it over quick.
Here's what I would say about fighting an enemy who wants to kill you and your family. Why did we drop 2 bombs, nuclear bombs, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end a war that we couldn't afford to lose? You don't understand, apparently, what Israel is facing. So when we were faced with destruction as a nation after Pearl Harbor, fighting the Germans and the Japanese, we decided to end the war by bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear weapons. That was the right decision. Give Israel the bombs they need to end the war they can't afford to lose, and work with them to minimize casualties. Well, why is it okay? Well, can I say this? Why is it okay for America to drop 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end their existential threat war? Why was it okay for us to do that? I thought it was okay. To Israel, do whatever you have to do to survive as a Jewish state.
Senator, again, military officials say the technology has changed. But let me ask you.
A congressman from Michigan is facing backlash for statements he made at a recent town hall meeting where he appeared to suggest that nuclear bombs should be dropped on Gaza. Republican Tim Walberg made the comments on Monday after being asked a question about U.S. plans to build a floating pier off the coast of Gaza to help deliver humanitarian aid into the war-torn territory.
We shouldn't be spending a dime on humanitarian aid. It should be like Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Get it over quick.
So let's be clear. There have still only been 2 atomic weapons used against human targets. And like the song said, there must never be a 3rd. Not least of which because the bombs used at Hiroshima and Nagasaki were among the weakest atomic weapons ever made. Most of the current arsenals of the world are orders of magnitude more deadly. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki would almost certainly violate 3 major requirements of armed conflict codified in the Additional Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions: to not intentionally attack civilians, to ensure that collateral damage against civilians is not disproportionate to the direct military advantage gained from the target's destruction, and to take all feasible precautions to reduce collateral damage against civilians. We must dispel the myths that make it possible for people like Senator Graham and Representative Walberg to toss around so cavalierly the possibility of using nuclear weapons again on a population center. One of those myths, as I mentioned, is that bombing Hiroshima was justified because it was a military target. In his first radio address after the bombing, President Truman said that, quote, the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base, because we wished in this first attack to avoid, insofar as possible, the killing of civilians. That's simply not true. As you can see here, the aiming point, the center circle of that drawing, is above the urban center of the city. It's hard to read, but if you look at the legend, numbers 1 and 2, the Army Transport Base and the Army Ordnance Depot are both outside the radius of the destruction, southeast of it. More than 90% of the people killed by the bomb in Hiroshima were civilians. But in my opinion, the biggest and most dangerous myth about the use of 2 atomic bombs is this: that dropping the bombs actually saved lives because otherwise Japan would have continued to fight for years. Here's a Wall Street Journal op-ed by former Los Alamos official John Hopkins that makes this argument. Hopkins said that the bombings were, quote, the lesser of 2 evils because 5 to 10 million Japanese lives and between 400,000 and 800,000 U.S. service members would have died from an invasion of the Japanese mainland. First of all, it's a false choice to say that the only avenues were using atomic weapons or a full-scale land invasion. Many experts believed that it was the United States' insistence on an unconditional surrender that was forestalling the war's end, and that Japan would likely agree to a surrender within months, even without an invasion or bombing. And needless to say, there is no consensus on what might have resulted from such an invasion. We don't have a second Earth to use as a test group, control group. But most historians believe that the estimates cited by Hopkins are inflated. Here's an awkward transition. But speaking of history, has anyone ever visited the World War II Museum in New Orleans? It's an incredible place, and I mean that very sincerely. Originally opening in 2000 as the National D-Day Museum, it is now affiliated with the Smithsonian Institute and has been adding new exhibits and pavilions over the years. The different pavilions dedicated to the European and Pacific theaters pack an incredible amount of information and artifacts into a well-designed space. I especially like how they center the stories of individuals from all different walks of life. The amount of research behind every interpretive panel is remarkable. You really could spend days there. We went there a few weeks ago, and I wanted to remind myself of how it interprets the decision to drop the A-bombs. There's a movie you can watch in the museum's theater called Beyond All Boundaries that is very impressive and has incredible production values. It's narrated by Tom Hanks, America's dad, and has a supporting voice cast of other A-list actors. But I want to read some of the script to you and see if you notice anything. In the pre-show, Tom Hanks says that the Japanese emperor was, quote, believed to be a living god, and he refers to the Japanese military as, quote, soldiers of the god emperor. Later in the film, after the D-Day landing at Normandy, a picture is painted of the increasingly desperate situation of the Japanese military in the Battle of Saipan. Hanks says, quote, with no hope of repelling the American forces, desperate Japanese soldiers charge into combat with bayonets on empty rifles, with knives and stones, with just sticks studded with razor blades. Some shout, Tenno Haika Banzai, long live the emperor, while they sacrifice their own lives. And not just soldiers, but civilians too choose suicide over surrender. Then another voice reads a 1944 Time magazine story entitled The Nature of the Enemy, quote, looking down, I counted the bodies of 7 others who had killed themselves. One, a child of about 5, clad in a ragged white shirt, floated stiffly in the surf. I turned to go. This is nothing, the Marine said. Half a mile down on the west side, you can see hundreds of them. Do the suicides of Saipan mean that the whole Japanese race will choose death before surrender? Tom Hanks comes back in, quote, the question haunts the thoughts of American strategists and soldiers alike. How far will we have to go? What lines will we have to cross to defeat an enemy who will not surrender? I could go on, but do you see it? The look what you made us do narrative? An enemy that is so blindly devoted to their god emperor that the entire nation might commit suicide before surrendering? I'm not saying that anything in the film or in the museum is factually incorrect or poorly researched, far from it. But this is a deliberate framing. It's one of those historical interpretive narratives that is meant to inhibit any feelings of guilt or doubt about the morality of using atomic weapons. Even decades after the Enola Gay fiasco, American museums still face enormous pressure to present the United States version of history. So having talked about what our collective memory of Hiroshima is, I want to share a different memory. Akihiro Takahashi was a hibakusha, an atomic bomb survivor, who came to speak to my class of study abroad students at Hiroshima University in 2002. Born in 1931, he was 14 years old when the bomb detonated about a mile away from his junior high school. Though he survived, his injuries from the bomb gave him permanent disabilities and health issues like keloids and chronic hepatitis. You can see in this photo that his ears were crushed in the blast and the cartilage of his ears rotted. His right elbow was locked at an angle of 120 degrees since then, and his fingers, except for the thumb, remained bent and unmovable. Where a piece of glass pierced his finger and destroyed the cells that grow the nail, one fingernail grew thick and black, too hard to cut with clippers. Mr. Takahashi served as director of the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum for 4 years. I'm going to read his testimony and memories of the bombing as illustrated by artist Goro Shikoku. I'm sorry we might go a little bit over the time, but I think this is important. Japan conducted a war of aggression against China and other Asian nations. We colonized the Korean peninsula for 36 years. Japan made a terrible mistake. Go, go soldiers, go! This phrase appeared in a textbook I read as an elementary school child. During the war, we received militaristic education using such textbooks. Most junior high school boys in those days assumed that they would join the military when they grew up. Our school teachers told us that becoming airmen of the Naval Air Force was admirable, and marching into the enemy's territory to kill as many enemy soldiers as possible was right and necessary for Japan to win the war, and we believed them. I therefore believe that the basic responsibility for the war lies with the Japanese government, because the Japanese government started the war. At the same time, however, I myself deeply repent the war. Just before the A-bomb was dropped on August 6th, an air raid warning and a subsequent caution had been cleared. Feeling safe, we went out onto the playground and waited for the morning assembly to begin. There were about 150 students on the playground, including about 60 of my classmates. We then saw a US B-29 bomber approaching, even though the warnings had already been cleared. We never dreamt that this plane was carrying the atomic bomb. In Hiroshima, the sky was perfectly clear that morning. The B-29 flew above us, leaving a beautiful vapor trail. Believing we were safe, we looked up at the flying plane, pointing to it at the sky. Then our teacher came out of the staff room and our class president called out, "Fall in, attention!" That was the instant the tragedy happened. I heard an incredible noise as complete darkness covered my eyes. Unable to see an inch ahead of me, I had no idea what had happened. Some say that there was a flash, but I do not remember it. From what I have heard, it was a pale blue light bursting out in all directions, followed by a powerful booming blast. We were blown away, unable to put up the least resistance. After a while, I recovered consciousness when the smoke that had covered the playground lifted and it became light again. I had been blown about 10 meters from where I had been before the explosion and had fallen hard on the ground. The blast had thrown me that far. I then found that 150 other students had all been blown in different directions and lay scattered around the playground. The wooden schoolhouse was flattened to the ground. Every house and building that had once stood around the school had collapsed because of the blast. I gazed into the distance and saw no houses. All had disappeared except for a few concrete buildings. Oh no, Hiroshima has disappeared, I thought. Then I looked at my own body. My school uniform had been burned and torn to tatters. At the moment of the A-bomb flashed in the sky, my uniform had spontaneously caught fire and burned to tatters. The blast peeled the skin right off the back of my head and down to my back, arms, hands, and legs. I could see my own red flesh exposed between tatters of skin burned by the heat ray. Recognizing that my state must be similar to the many other students lying around me, I was seized momentarily by panic. Quote, "Flee to a river in case of an air raid." This is what I remembered being told during the evacuation drills by the teacher. I promptly left the playground to flee to the river. On my way to the river, I heard somebody calling my name from behind. "Hey, Takahashi, Takahashi, wait for me, wait for me." I turned around and saw my friend, Tatsuya Yamamoto. He was calling me. We were in the same class, and I used to go to school with him every day. He was crying, "Mom, help me, help." He just kept crying. I told him, "Stop crying. Crying is no use. Get moving instead, or we could be in terrible trouble. We have to get out of here now." I scolded him sometimes and encouraged him at other times. I stayed with him and pulled him along. During the war, we wore what we called a combat cap. Where the cap covered it, we still had some hair, but the heat ray burned away all the hair that was not covered by the cap. The exposed spots were bald. The cap was, of course, blown off. A great number of bombed people were fleeing in long lines. They all held their arms out in front of them, their shredded skin dangling from their fingertips. Their clothes were all tattered. Some were almost naked. Their skin had peeled off and red flesh was exposed. Everyone was fleeing but dragging their bare feet, staggering along. It looked like a procession of ghosts. Many in the procession had been hideously injured. This boy was covered with broken glass pieces from the waist up. These glass pieces were probably window glass shattered into fragments and scattered by the blast. I could see a few such glass fragments in my own body in several places, including my waist and both arms. One woman was covered in blood and one of her eyeballs hanging out. This had been caused by the blast. The man on the left had been so badly burned above the waist that his skin was peeling off from his entire back, exposing burned red flesh. There were many dead bodies. Among them, I saw a hideously damaged woman's body. Her ruptured internal organs were pouring out onto the ground. This had also been caused by the blast. I also saw a baby lying beside a woman who was apparently the baby's mother. Both were seriously burned. Most of their skin had peeled down to red flesh. The baby was shrieking. He was still alive. But we were just boys. We couldn't do anything for the baby. A horse lay dead with its neck in a trough and its skin peeled from most of its body, exposing red flesh. The entire scene was horrible. Words can never describe such horrible sights. With such dreadful sights in front of us, we ran for our lives toward the river. The wreckage of houses destroyed by the blast blocked every alley from the main street to the riverbank. It was impossible to walk normally. We desperately climbed over the wreckage of the houses, crawling on all fours, and finally reached the riverside. As soon as we reached the riverside, fire suddenly broke out in the wreckage of the houses we had just crossed. The fire was spreading rapidly, and a tall column of flame rose to the sky with a loud sound and blast, like a volcano erupting. Even now, I can clearly remember how frightened I was. We were very fortunate to escape that fire. The fire was caused by the wreckage of houses destroyed by the bomb blast spontaneously catching fire due to the heat rays that flashed for a second in the sky. That fire was what is called a super high temperature fire. Many were trapped beneath destroyed houses with no hope of help reaching them. One or two people could do nothing to save them. The spreading fire quickly reached them, and many survivors had no choice but to flee, leaving beloved, living family members beneath the rubble to perish in the fire. Within 2 kilometers from the hypocenter, the fire burned everything combustible, including all wooden houses. Crawling down to the riverside, we saw a small bridge that had miraculously remained intact after the blast. That bridge saved our lives. I crossed the bridge to the other side and suddenly realized that my friend Yamamoto was no longer with me. Later, after I recovered, I heard from his mother that he had been taken to his home by a kind stranger, but died 6 weeks later on September 16 from acute radiation poisoning. I crossed the bridge and got to the other side alone. The opposite bank was 3 kilometers from the hypocenter. Luckily, there was no fire over there. I made it, I thought to myself. Then I let go. Tears welled up in my eyes for the first time, and I couldn't hold them back. At the same time, I felt that my body was getting hot, unbearably hot, so I entered the river and soaked in the water. The cold water felt so good on my burning hot body, it was like a treasure. In reality, however, floating dead bodies filled the river. It looked like hell on earth. Thousands of people were soaking their bodies like I was. Many drank river water, then were carried away to their deaths. Soon I came out of the river and went to a makeshift relief station made of bamboo brought down from the mountains. I received simple treatment and rested. A number of bombed victims were waiting in line for treatment. Suddenly, large black drops of rain began falling. Black rain was formed when the dust sent to the sky by the blast mixed with rain. This black rain contained radiation. Some who were directly exposed to that rain later suffered from radiation sickness. Luckily, I was in a tent, so I was not exposed to the rain. Looking at the first black rain I had seen in my life, it all felt so strange. I gazed at the rain and wondered if black rain had ever fallen before on this earth. I waited until it stopped raining and started walking home by myself. I was worried, however, wondering whether I could walk the more than 6 kilometers to my house after suffering such severe burns. After walking for a while, I heard somebody calling my name again. "Takahashi, Takahashi, take me home with you." It was a moaning request for help. I looked in the direction of the moan and found a classmate, Tokujiro Hata, crouching by the roadside. We were from the same town and went to the same school together every day. I looked at his body. The skin had peeled off the soles of both his feet, and I could see the burned red flesh inside. It was impossible for Hata to walk. I said, "How did you get here?" He said that a kind stranger had carried him on a bicycle and left him there. I was worried about whether I could find a way to help him. He was my classmate from the same town, so I did not want to go home myself and leave him behind. I wanted to help him some way or another, but couldn't find a way to do it. In the midst of misfortune, he was fortunate to have no severe gashes or burns except for the soles of his feet. I finally thought of 2 ideas to help him. One was for him to crawl on his hands and knees like a cat or dog. This way his feet did not touch the ground. The other idea was for him to walk on the backs of his heels with me supporting him from behind. By traveling in these 2 ways, alternatively, we traveled very slowly towards home, much slower than a snail's pace. Walking in that unique way exhausted us, so we rested by the roadside. I happened to turn around, and there were my granduncle and grandaunt approaching. I was overjoyed to see them and called out at the top of my voice. They were very surprised. They never expected to find me in such a place. They were on their way home from the country where they had been attending a memorial service for their relatives. We were extremely lucky that they happened to come by. My granduncle carried me on his back, my grandaunt carried my friend Hata, and that is how we were finally able to get home. Without their help, I'm sure we would have died along the way, and I wouldn't have had the chance to talk to you as I am now. My friend and I finally reached home on a stretcher that my grandfather brought. After I got home, my mother cut off all my clothes with scissors to undress me without the pain I would have experienced if my clothes had brushed against my hands and legs where red flesh was exposed. She dressed me in a new yukata, a light cotton kimono. I later heard that my friend Hata had died from acute radiation poisoning on August 8th, 2 days after the bombing. For 1.5 years, I received treatment for my burns. Fortunately, one of our acquaintances was a doctor, and he visited my house twice a day, morning and evening. This doctor, however, was an ENT doctor, ear, nose, and throat. Such doctors did not normally treat burns. That would be a surgeon or a dermatologist. However, we couldn't ask for more because with the city virtually destroyed, we had no doctors, nurses, medicines, or food available to us. It is estimated that about 300 doctors and 1,800 nurses were in Hiroshima City before the atomic bombing. More than 70% were killed by the bombing. I was very lucky to receive treatment from a doctor regardless of his specialty because a great number of victims never got any treatment. In this way, I managed to survive. I was extremely fortunate. However, treatment was a painful ordeal. The burns were covered with gauze bandages smeared with medicine. Each day, the doctor came to remove the bandages. Since the summer heat completely dried the gauze, it stuck to the wound. I couldn't stand the extreme pain I felt when it was pulled off. Blood and pus spouted from the affected area. I clearly remember wailing, "Ow, ow, it hurts, stop." My grandfather washed the blood and pus from the gauze just removed, sterilized it in boiling water, dried it, and used it the next day. No better treatment was available in post-war Japan due to the scarcity of goods. Although I have survived, since 1971 I have suffered from chronic hepatitis thought to have been caused by radiation. I have been hospitalized 14 times, and currently I receive injections 3 or 4 times a week. I suffer from many diseases. Every day I'm anxious and painfully aware of my difficulties and the pains involved with living. In despair, I sometimes wonder why I have to continue to live while suffering this much. Whenever I yield to despair, however, I encourage myself by saying that I managed to survive the bombing, so I should continue to live. This is how I have lived thus far. Mr. Takahashi died on November 1st, 2011. I'm grateful that he was willing to share his story with me and the other foreign students. Now I've shared it with you. The horrors he and others experienced should be part of our collective memory, so that we can affirm that there will never be a third bomb used against humanity. Thank you.
as you would like, stand as you are able as we sing our closing song. The words are actually on your tables for you. This is original music by Mike and our choir. So join if you are able, please. Choir, come on up. Our closing words this afternoon are a prayer for Hiroshima Day by William Singford. Like most traumatic scars, the ones that are found in Hiroshima and Nagasaki are permanent, reminders of the terrible damage human beings can inflict. Similar scars can be found in their hearts and souls of people around the world who understand this kind of terror. Scars of grief, sadness, fear, and even shame. None of these scars promise an end to wars and devastation. Instead, they serve as a reminder of healing and renewal, of a return to life. O gracious God and Spirit of life and love, help us to see our scars, those we have created, those we are called to witness, and those that we can soothe and heal. We are deeply grateful for the buds and blossoms that even the most scarred have to offer as a revelation to the world, and especially on the 79th anniversary of Hiroshima Day, We renew our commitment to peace individually, collectively, and globally, to peace within, which calms our anxieties and our fears, to peace between, which overcomes differences, animosities, and conflicts, and to the great peace beyond even our understanding that is your gift, to which we attempt to be stewards of the world's with. Amen. May you go in peace and have a great week. Blessed be.